We often look to musicians to meet the moment, speak truth to power, especially at times like this, considering everything that's going on in the world. Well, recently, Bruce Springsteen released Streets of Minneapolis, and some are hearing this as a righteous expression of anger. Others feel it might be a little too on the nose. Carl Wilson and Vish Khanna, they're here to get into what makes a good protest song. Vish, Carl, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Okay, so let's kick it off with a bit of that song I was just talking about.
Minneapolis, I hear your voice singing through the bloody mist. We'll take our stand for this land.
So that's Bruce Springsteen with Streets of Minneapolis. I mean, this is a song that just came out 4 days after ICE agents killed Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. And the song also references Renee Good, who was killed 2 weeks prior. If you're looking at the video, you're going to see the protest. You'll see Renee Good's photos all over that. Carl, I mean, what do you think about this song? Like, do you think Bruce Springsteen is delivering at this moment?
Well, first we should note that this is just one of a sort of flood of related songs about ICE in Minneapolis and current political situation in the U.S. that have come out in the past few weeks from, punk bands and folk singers and even Dave Matthews. Everyone's been weighing in, but none of them, of course, are Bruce Springsteen. When I first heard it, I felt, as you kind of mentioned, that it was a little on the nose, that it was a little stiff and awkward compared to Springsteen's history of issue-related songs. But that was on just first hearing the recorded version. And a few days later, I saw the video of him performing it actually in Minneapolis at the First Avenue Club in a benefit, for the people there who are actually on the ground in the middle of that. And I really felt the song come to life and connect with that struggle then. And it's a real reminder that protest songs really gain their real energy and strength from the way that they connect to the moment and to a movement outside of them. We tend to think that songs, in the 60s or whenever changed the world, but you have to remember that songs really just reflect political ideas that are coming out of society and hopefully can connect and reinforce and give solace and a rallying point to the people actually on the ground doing the work.
That is interesting to think about how a protest song could just fall into a vacuum, but then you see the actual audience, reflecting on or, really resounding with that, resonating with that song. And that makes a whole lot of difference.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Vish, I want to get, what is your reaction to the song?
Well, I think what Carl said is accurate. I think the context of a release like this is almost as significant as the art that is made as well. I mean, yes, in the discography of Bruce Springsteen, he's written really artful, subtle, multi-layered songs that speak to the human condition. But it's very difficult to be cynical about someone of his stature, expressing themselves at this point and with such urgency. The fact that he wrote, recorded, and released a song within 3 days, I mean, that's commendable in itself. And I thought it was a really powerful song the second I heard it. I mean, on the nose, Carl and I have been in discussions about this before, about how to be artful when you're expressing a message. And, Springsteen, Bob Dylan, these sorts of artists have done a remarkable job of being artful. But as I've said before, it's a really difficult time to be nuanced when people misinterpret things either deliberately or I'm not sure if it's a literacy level thing. They don't get it. I mean, Bruce Springsteen's song is essentially like hearing a news report. You hear real names, you hear real actions. And I guess, unfortunately, at this time in our collective society, we need these direct messages to actually permeate through the noise. It's very facts-oriented. And I think in that regard, it reminds me of the fact that Bruce Springsteen is, in fact, part of a folk music tradition. He's speaking to the people. He went, as Carl said, he went down to Minneapolis to perform for people. It wasn't some abstract thing. So yeah, on again, the context of it all matters to me. I think it's commendable he wrote this song and released it when he did. It's commendable that he's using his platform to speak out, as many artists are. And this is just where we're at. I think the messaging has to be as direct as possible.
You know, I found it interesting that you mentioned Springsteen and then immediately Bob Dylan, because that's exactly what my streaming app did. Like, I was listening to this song by Springsteen and it went to Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind, as if, like, you know, there's a whole history of protest music in between, and it went all the way back there. And speaking of that history, I do want to play a much older song that feels very relevant to this conversation, because it came out in 1970, just a few weeks after another infamous shooting.
Tin soldiers and Nixon coming. We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming for dead in Ohio.
So that's Crosby, Still, Nash, and Neil Young with Ohio. And that was written in response to Kent State, right? Like the killing of 4 college students by the Ohio National Guard at the university campus during this anti-Vietnam War protest. Carl, I mean, look, that song was written about a specific incident nearly 56 years ago, and yet you still hear it on classic rock radio stations today. So what is it about that song, which is, you know, written in a very specifically, like in the heat of a particular moment, that what is it about that makes it transcend that moment and you know, become this eternal anthem?
There's a lot of contextual reasons. You know, on the one hand, it's, you know, Neil Young at the height of his young powers being able to sort of capture in a few words and a few chords a really powerful feeling that really resonated with the shock and grieving that people felt over that incident. On the other hand, it was also at a time when the counterculture and the relationship of that to the commercial music industry was in this rare kind of moment of coinciding. And so, you know, a song like that 90% of the time, as with similar songs being written in response to events today, they don't get on the radio. They don't get the kind of promotion that you'd expect. But that was a particular window. And then you have that speaking to a baby boom generation that became very powerful and ended up being the people who controlled the media that in years to come. And so that becomes preserved. And I think as great as that piece of work is, and as evocative as it still is, we kind of live under the shadow of this model of kind of, you know, Dylan and Neil Young and these kind of, you know, troubadour folk rock singers of the 60s. And we end up kind of thinking of that as the only model for protest music. And, you know, we overlook, for example, when we've been talking about the new music this month, we haven't looked back to 2020 when there was also a flood of protest music coming out around the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests. And people involved in that will remember a lot of those songs for the rest of their lives, but they may not get the same kind of mainstream media exposure that something like Ohio does.
I mean, you're making me think of just, I mean, hip hop as a genre, right? You know, like so much, you know, that it's a born from protest in a way. It's immersed in protest music, and you know, so I mean, while other people might be waiting for a white guy with a guitar to sing protest music, I mean, there's so many of us that will be pumping Ice Cube's Predator album, and you said something else that really made me think about, like, you know, the fact that this Neil Young song Ohio got played on the radio, which, you know, you think of F the Police for obvious reasons was not, but there is so much protest music, as you said, that doesn't get that kind of radio play. And you could think of something as recently as Macklemore's Hins Hall. So it is something to think about, like whether the audience is there, but also whether these kinds of songs are being platformed. And Vish,
Yeah,
I mean,
whether advertisers and owners want to put that kind of thing on the air, contrary to, you know, their business interests and that kind of thing. It's all, yeah.
Exactly. Vish, I mean, what are you thinking then are the most important qualities of a good protest song that could meet the moment and be able to specifically meet the audience that's waiting for it?
Well, to follow up on your invocation of hip hop culture, I mean, one of the quotes that sticks with me and has forever is when Chuck D described hip hop and rap music as the black CNN. The notion that you're actually hearing on the ground reporting from artists in their work. And I don't want to sound like a fogey, but it does seem like there's less of that coming from that culture, unless there's, or in popular culture, I should say, not just hip hop culture, than there has been before. And I think Carl just provided a bit of a context as to why. I mean, we invoke radio, which is just simply doesn't have the power it once did. But to answer your question, I think passion, obviously, in a protest song. I think a hook, frankly, a melody. I mean, we're talking about Ohio still, almost 60 years since it came out, because it's a catchy ass song. I mean, that's part of the appeal of it. It is the context and the passion you hear in the vocals and in the lyrics, but it's really catchy. I think, some months ago, Carl and I believe, were both on this show talking about a recent Neil Young release, and the fact that he actually interpolated "This Land Is Your Land" by Woody Guthrie, a classic folk song. And one of the reasons I think Neil had done that at that point rather, was because that is a familiar melody and it will resonate with people who are thinking about America. I thought it was a multi-layered theft that he engaged in. So I think it's about the passion. It's about actually coming up with something that's infectious, an earworm of some kind. And because that's a folk music thing. Folk music is for people. It's for people to sing along to. And so I think if you can come up with something that actually captures people's hearts, minds, and their sense of melody and their sense of inclusiveness, like if you find yourself singing along to a song like Ohio, which often a lot of us do, it's a wonderful vocal melody, but then you do the second job of like dialing into what's being said and what's being discussed. I mean, if you were writing any kind of protest anthem or socio-political anthem, that's the sweet sauce. You've done two things at once. You've said something substantive, but it's got a confection to it. It's sugary. It's sweet. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, then, I mean, I got to ask you, in terms of the confection and sweet and what is grabbing the people's attention today. I mean, if we're going to talk about protest music here today in 2026, we got to talk about this guy.
Now they'll circle the wagons, drape the man in a flag, and say don't trust what your eyes can see. They'll say it's her fault instead for getting shot in the head when we all watch the same damn thing.
So that is Jesse Wells, a singer-songwriter from Arkansas, very popular online thanks to these kind of rapid response folk songs to current events that he posts on YouTube. And that one you just heard, it's called Good versus Ice. It was released after Renee Good was fatally shot last month. And, he's managed to turn this viral bit into a legit recording career, right? Like earlier this month, he was up for 4 Grammys, and he's playing Massey Hall in Toronto next month. Carl, does Wells' popularity what does it tell us about the state of protest music today?
Well, it certainly reflects that there's a hunger to hear somebody reaffirming and reflecting on the crazy situation that we all find ourselves in. But, obviously Wells, we were talking about this sort of stereotype out of the 60s, and Wells kind of fits that out of central casting, right? He's this like scruffy little white guy with an acoustic guitar standing out in a field singing his songs. And, music critics particularly, and, a lot of people on the left have a kind of cynical reaction to that and find him gimmicky. But I think that what's interesting is, that's kind of camouflage for this actual digital project that I'm surprised hasn't been more of a thing in the past, where, we have influencers and YouTubers constantly, blathering on about their opinions on these things hours a day. And we haven't really seen music take full advantage of that. And I think that Wells is kind of an innovator on that level, or at least the first to really carry that off. And, if you call it gimmicky, the sort of young Bob Dylan resonances to me are a little hokey about him. And I was put off by that at first. But I think the funniest connection is that, in a lot of ways, the thing that's most like the young Bob Dylan about him is that he's an opportunist and using kind of this protest music to some degree as a vehicle for his own career. And Dylan, was kind of unapologetic about that and moved on from it in his time. But it doesn't mean that what he was doing wasn't substantial and not meaningful at the time. So I think it's easy to have a cynical response, but in some ways, protest music challenges us to get past our earnestness and think about the way these things might connect people and so I'm willing to give Jesse Wells, as patchy as his work might be to sometimes, the benefit of the doubt and the fact that he's making an impact.
Yeah.
I think, if I may, real quick, I think part of the cynicism is about the medium. I think there's some of us who still can't get over the fact that people go on YouTube or TikTok to create things, and then they go viral, and then they get Grammy Awards. We were just talking about the power of radio. I mean, I think we're being a little media snobby about it at this point, or we're still not on the other side of understanding that YouTube and TikTok are the music dissemination methods that people have access to more so than probably mainstream radio. My daughter was singing along to every Grammy Award nominee the other day, like as they were coming up, and we looked at her and we're like, why do you know these songs? Like, I've never heard you play these songs. She's like, YouTube Shorts. Like, this is the medium that has sort of, supplanted radio to spread the word about music. These are the mediums, I should say. So I just wanted to circle back to what we've been talking about in terms of how does this music get out there? How is it effectively disseminated? And that's part of why Jesse Wells is part of this, I guess, vanguard of people who are spreading the word about their music. I guess it's gimmicky because they're filming themselves. They're just using the medium. They're just using the media at their disposal to get the word out. I don't think it's that dissimilar from people taking their 7-inch or 45 to a radio station back in the day and saying, can you please play this? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, because I'm taking your point because, of course, like, social media, YouTube, these are the new platforms that are reaching everybody. And, of course, this is where we're often finding the music that, again, when we're talking about what gets played on the radio, we're going to find them on those platforms. But also, I mean, what comes with that is this idea of feeding the beast, as in the algorithm. And this idea that when you're posting online, you have to post every day and you have to keep churning it out. So when we're talking about someone like Wells, Vish, you think of this fine line between like kind of responding to the news and then just churning out content to capitalize on what everyone's talking about, especially again to feed that algorithm. So would you say that with that in mind, like Wells is staying on the right side of that line?
Well, I don't know much about this fellow. I admit I've been cynical about him myself. But again, I'm just rethinking this as we're speaking today. This has been a profound appearance for me, guys, because now I'm thinking about it. And like, I think it's a medium is the message argument at this point. Like it's because of how he has been contextualized or rather the context he's in. I go back to what I was saying earlier, 30, 40 years ago, there were conventions that everyone followed. And one of the reasons we're cynical or don't take things seriously is because for some reason, some of us have this knee-jerk reaction. That's just TikTok. That's just Instagram. That's not serious. It's frivolous. Like, there's a context to how we criticize things without actually picking up on what the content is. You say he's just churning out content. Well, again, that's what people did with radio and music videos. It's just constant content. It's just there was less of it and it wasn't in our hands and we weren't carrying around devices that played those things all the time. So it is a context situation. We are inundated with content. That's just the way we're living. And some people pop out using these content machines. Jesse Wells, I think, if I may commend him, is seeing that and saying, you know what? If everyone's churning out crap or slop, I'm going to try to do something substantive here and say something meaningful while also doing the neat trick, as Carl said, of tying back to 60s folk culture. Like, he's going to hit that sweet generational spot of potentially appealing to younger audiences because of the mediums he has access to and older audiences because of the kind of music he's making.
Yeah.
I honestly did not expect, Vish, for you to be the defender of the great new media on this, but I love it.
I'm not necessarily a defender of it. I have my issues with it, but I'm just saying this is what we're kind of talking about.
Exactly. Well, I mean, look, I should say, we were talking about kind of a number of the anti-ICE songs that have been coming up in recent weeks. Carl, you mentioned that there's so many. I mean, on top of Springsteen, we do have also Billy Bragg, My Morning Jacket. I do want us to take a listen to this.
El tigre no se lo pide, la jungla lo respeta. Un animal de la tierra, la gente lo recuerda. Mantiene y protege el orden de la comunidad. Cuando los pendejos se desacatar. Basta ya.
Okay, so from California, that is Kane Kulto with Chutes Cat on the track Basta Ya, which is Spanish for That's Enough. Carl, can you walk us through what's happening on this track and what does this say about how protest music is evolving in 2026?
Yeah, well, this song came out in November in response to the LA version of the ICE raids that have been happening for the past year, and it's a song that Canculto originally conceived in response to Palestine. So in some ways, it's trying to connect these different struggles in different places. And, it's crossing genre. It's got a little bit of merengue in there, and it's got a little bit of hip hop and a little bit of hyperpop. And, he's a singer and violinist. So it's a real brew. But I think, coming around to this idea of what protest music looks like, we have to remember that, making beats on your phone is now just as much of a sort of populist and accessible thing to people as picking up an acoustic guitar. And we need to listen to the sounds that come out of the communities directly affected by these events as well, and Spanish language music. The Bad Bunny performance reminded us on the weekend of the Super Bowl how effective, and how much is going on in that realm of music today. And, again, the mainstream media is a little slow to pick up on these things that don't fit, a Bruce Springsteen image of what a protest singer is.
That's so interesting because, the Bad Bunny thing was actually very fascinating to me because, with the Super Bowl performance, you discovered how many people caught on to Bad Bunny because they're vibing with the beats, because they're enjoying the music, and then discovering after the fact, it's like, oh, he's speaking about things. Vish,
Yeah,
I wonder...
talking about Puerto Rico and colonialism all the time.
Yeah. So Vish, I want to bring you in on that. What do you, in terms of that idea of the kind of protest music and people becoming more aware of the kinds of protest music that goes beyond this template that they have in their minds.
Yeah.
What else are we not, what are we not also, what are we holding ourselves back from in terms of discovering great protest music?
That's a difficult question for me to ponder. I'm not sure what. I
didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
No. I'm just trying to figure out where you're coming from there. Yeah, I think that the Bad Bunny thing to me, as I was watching it and trying to process what was going on at the Super Bowl, I don't have a vocabulary in classical music. I don't have a vocabulary in filmmaking per se. I don't know how they do stuff, but I know what I feel. Mm-hmm. And so when we were watching the Bad Bunny performance and I saw the symbolism, I thought, sadly, embarrassingly, I don't speak any Spanish. I was moved. I felt things. I understood what was going on based on the symbolism. So I think, we're talking about people who are maybe too on the nose. That Bad Bunny performance was actually very subtle. It was very multi-layered. So when you say, what are we missing? It could just be a second, third, fourth look at something. I kind of want to rewatch the Bad Bunny performance to pick up on all the stuff that I read about after, because it was moving so quickly. I was so astounded by that production, the visual aspect of it. But yeah, I think that you have the on the nose stuff, like some of the artists we've been talking about today, where it's very direct. And then you have people who are doing things that are more multi-layered and subtle, but it's there. And I personally think every artist is expressing something about the context and the time they're in. And the artists I love the most are always sort of saying something. You just might not catch it right away, if that makes any sense.
Amazing. No, I think that's a great note to go out on. So listen, you both, opened my eyes up to so much music and so many things to think about when it comes to that music. So thank you both so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having us. I enjoyed this talk. It changed me.
Amazing. Commotion's doing that every day, guys. Carl Wilson's a writer in Toronto, and you could read his latest column on this very topic of protest songs at Slate. And Vish Khanna is the host of the podcast Creative Control, both words spelled with the letter K. He's in Edmonton. And that's it for the podcast today. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram. We're at Commotion CBC. I'm Radheyan Simonpillai sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and I'll see you tomorrow.